Hi, my name is Seth, and right now you're viewing this video either on YouTube or my website, Seth Singleton Storyteller. And I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about storytelling in a way that's different, perhaps, from just defining it or to describe it and its value or role. I felt it was more important to tell a story because I think sometimes the greatest value behind storytelling is shown through the stories we use to talk about it. 2 weeks ago, I was enjoying a quiet, lazy Saturday morning, one of the first that my wife was able to enjoy with me after she had changed her schedule and had Saturdays off now. She looked up a Santa Rosa ToyCon and spur of the moment said, "Let's go for a trip." A little bit of an adventure. We took about 30, maybe 45 minutes getting ready. Didn't look up who was there or what might be going on except to see that LeVar Burton and Mr. Baldwin of Serenity and Firefly would be special guests. Now, I'm sure there would be lines to see them, and that while they were a main draw, the interest overall would be to have a great experience. And while I was doing that, I was lucky enough to round a corner and come across a really great artist and storyteller named Mike Grell. Now, for those of you who are in the comic book industry, you're familiar with Mike Grell. Mike Grell had created a legacy in his portfolio, and he had created a lot of iconic original characters. Among them, probably the most legendary would be his character of Warlord, although I have personal attachments to characters he created for Shaman's Tears. But what I'd like to talk about today is what Mike Grell did with a character known as the Green Arrow. Now, if you're a fan of CW's DC Comics themed TV shows, you know who the Green Arrow is. But if you're not, if you don't read comics, if you don't know the name Stephen Amell or of the show and the character Green Arrow, then it's helpful to understand how Mike Grell played an important role in bringing the Green Arrow that we know now into reality. But I only learned this when I had the opportunity to talk with Mike and ask him a few great questions. While I was, he provided me with an interesting challenge, which was to ask him anything. And I had to kind of pause and really figure out what direction I wanted to come to. I, again, had no preparation, and yet the only thing that came to mind was the relevance of the work he had done on a series called the Longbow Hunters. So I asked him, how is it that you created this great storyline for the Longbow Hunters about the Green Arrow? And when did you know that you had really locked in to what the key storytelling element or what the key to the puzzle was that gave you the confidence to move forward with the project, and in such a way that it's had the impact that it has? Now, for a little history, the Longbow Hunters came out in the 1980s. And up until that time, Green Arrow was seen in many ways as a Batman-esque character. He had trick arrows and arrow-themed gear and vehicles, much like Batman. But it was difficult to see any sort of separation between the two. Mike took the opportunity to, or Mr. Grell took the opportunity to approach the character, and by viewing his roots and origin, to tell a story about a Green Arrow who wasn't just another Batman. Instead, he focused on the concept behind Green Arrow, who, in the origin that had long been part of DC continuity, was a wealthy playboy who during a shipwreck, was marooned on an island, and there taught himself how to be a hunter using a bow and arrow. When he returned to mainland United States and saw that crime and other conflicts existed, he used his skills and dressed himself in the role of, well, a Robin Hood type character and fought crime. Mike Grell took that story and, with the Longbow Hunters, had Green Arrow retrace his roots, and in doing so, offered up an internal storyline for the Green Arrow about why he did what he did and what things drove him, and also how what he had learned on the island actually made him a very different crime fighter than the sort of pale imitation of Batman that he had often been relegated to. So I asked Mike this question: how did you know that you had locked on to the element that was going to make the Longbow Hunters such a great comic book miniseries? And Mike had a great story. Mike told me that he had been contacted by DC, and this was in a time when he had walked away from the comic book superhero line of storytelling and was working on other areas of story. But that when he was approached by DC, he was told, pick any character that would be the one that you could do anything you wanted with, and we'll give it to you if you come back to DC. So he said Green Arrow, and the immediate response was yes. And as Mr. Grell told me, he then had to deal with the fact that he was given exactly what he wanted, and now he had to figure out how to make the best of it. So he was able to enjoy a lunch or dinner, I'd have to clarify that, but lunch or dinner later that evening. And when he did, that lunch and dinner was with another well-known comic book writer named Frank Miller. Now, if you don't know Frank Miller, he's made quite a name for himself in comics like Daredevil and in a seminal work known as The Dark Knight Returns. But he's also made an impact on cinema with the adaptations of projects like Sin City and 300. And his power as a storyteller is evident not only in his comics, but in the adaptations that exist in those movie forms. So Mr. Grell sitting down with Frank Miller, two legendary writers, and Mike's pointing out that he now has this problem where he's been given exactly what he wants, and he needs to figure out how to make the best of it. Frank Miller responds with the simplest and most honest answer he can, and it's illuminating. He says, well, the Green Arrow is a hunter, so make him an urban hunter, and you've got a great story to tell. I'm smiling now because I'm having that same sense of realization that I did when Mike told me that story. It's the simplest things that can have the most powerful impact. And while it might have been standard or even common to look for another way to approach this challenge, Frank Miller did an amazing thing by focusing on the character and what would drive the story about the character. And his answer was an urban hunter. Now, that might seem like a small thing, but its impact was clear to Mike. As soon as he heard that, he realized that he had the answer to his problem, and that by focusing on storytelling through the eyes of the Green Arrow and how he viewed the city as a hunter who had taken his island skills and moved them to an urban environment, how he could show a return to the roots of his crime fighting by channeling the skills of the hunter that had made him so effective when he was on the island all by himself. You can look up for yourself just to see how successful Longbow Hunters has been for both the Green Arrow and Mike Grell. But the impact can be seen in the stories that are told on the CW, Green Arrow and Arrow, and the storylines that they have emulated from Mike Grell's comic book miniseries. And that impact has created not only a character, but a long-running popular series that points to the very same elements that made Longbow Hunters so successful. It's really impressive when you're looking at a storyteller and you're asking a question about storytelling, and the answer he gives is so perfect because it is told with another story. The value of storytelling isn't just that it does things. It's about the way it does things. It's about using stories to tell stories and to tell more stories. I'm going to continue to share every example I come across and have learned about the value of storytelling and how we use storytelling in our daily lives. And if I can, I'm going to follow the example of Mike Grell and Frank Miller by telling you about these things through as many stories as I can. Thanks for joining me, thanks for listening, and I look forward to coming back soon with another example of great storytelling. If you have a great story that you would love to share and tell, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact me at my website, Seth Singleton Storyteller, or through email at sethsingleton@gmail.com. I'm looking forward to hearing your stories, and I'm also looking forward to sharing more with you.